Governor Wes Moore is avoiding questions that Spotlight on Maryland posed to him directly this week regarding an investigation into the SNAP program, also known as the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or food stamps more commonly known. 2.5 weeks ago, the governor told Fox 45's Mackenzie Frost there was an investigation into whistleblower allegations that senior officials discussed how they could maintain a high payment error rate on food stamps in order to delay federal penalties. Governor Moore said the allegations weren't true and that the investigation would be made public. Spotlight has reached out to the governor's office several times since then for more details on the investigation, and so far, they have not received a response.
So we've heard a lot about Somali fraud specifically in the last month and a half, and this is due in large part to the reporting of Nick Shirley and, of course, the subsequent backlash to said reporting, where everyone in the Democratic Party rushed to defend the Somali community as, of course, according to them, they built this entire country from scratch. And by the way, I don't know if you guys know this, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but Somalia is actually an older and much better civilization than the United States of America, which of course should beg the question, why are refugees coming here from Somalia rather than American refugees going to Somalia? But while that scandal does have unique elements of it, the fact that it's a core ethnic group that seems to be working together on all these different various schemes, the lack of oversight from the Tim Walz administration, that's absolutely embarrassing. Make no mistake about it, there is something that is absolutely not unique about that, and that is the fact that these government programs that seek to help the most vulnerable are very often rife with fraud and abuse. It's just that nobody was looking at it. So of course, we heard recently that the Trump administration was going to try to crack down on other programs, and among those other programs happens to be the SNAP program, Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, or food stamps as it's more commonly known, and a bunch of states have been asked to produce data on their payments, on their error rate, so that the Trump administration can get an assessment on who is deserving of these funds and who isn't. However, as you guys might have heard, a bunch of blue states are refusing to turn over that data. In fact, they're trying to sue the federal government over that, and among those states is the state of Maryland, which not only is in this fight with the Trump administration at this moment in time, but it also has one of the highest error rates in terms of payments in the entire country. Around 15% of the payments from Maryland's SNAP program are going out inaccurately. Now, this could be fraudulent payments to people who are no longer eligible, payments to people who are dead, duplicate payments, or any combination thereof. But in reality, this is exactly what the Trump administration is looking for. However, Maryland appears to be not only covering this up, but also looking for ways, according to a whistleblower, to keep that error rate high in order to make sure they can keep dishing out the cash. And this, of course, has led to much suspicion of Governor Wes Moore, suspicion that he did not lay to rest by his recent announcement of investigation, and then him saying that the investigation already happened, and then him saying there was nothing to investigate. So I think it's important that we talk about this, but before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay.
Governor Wes Moore is doubling down as a defender of SNAP benefits. Tonight, one taxpayer advocate that I spoke with is arguing that it's Maryland's own mismanagement, not federal politics, that's putting this food assistance funding at risk.
Now, obviously, I have to point out for all you guys out there in the audience that Rebecca Pryor from Project 45 Baltimore, a very, very attractive lady, nice looking lady. I didn't point it out in a previous video where I talked about a local news lady and you guys went crazy in the comments, so I'm pointing it out here. But essentially, the argument that she's bringing forward is from a taxpayer advocate who's saying that this whole song and dance from Governor Wes Moore about how he's a defender of the SNAP program is actually completely hollow and ridiculous, because in reality, what is putting the program in jeopardy is his own mismanagement of said program, not anything to do with the Trump administration. And this is actually true in two ways. So first and foremost, obviously the Trump administration is seeking to audit these payments, discover what is behind the error rate in order to fix that, in order to make sure the proper amount of money is going out to qualified people. But in addition to that, you also have the fact that funds are not unlimited. So if you're wasting all of this money each and every year from that budget by paying people who are dead or not eligible or not deserving or giving out duplicate payments, that means that somebody is getting shortchanged, maybe not in the state of Maryland, but in other parts of the country. And that is a situation where you're actually putting putting the most vulnerable people in jeopardy because you don't want to manage your program properly. Now, of course, I will let him speak for himself a little bit, but this is like the prelude. This is like the segment that encouraged a whistleblower to approach Fox 45 in order to actually reveal the new information on this particular error rate.
The battle over SNAP benefits intensifying this week. The Trump administration threatening to cut off funding to states refusing to turn over data, detailing who is receiving what. In response,
I do not understand. And the level of cruelty that we continue to see from the president of the United States is just absolutely staggering.
Governor Wes Moore joining several states suing to block the request. In a statement, Moore calling the ultimatum reckless.
So, of course, we have the take from Governor Wes Moore that this is cruel. This is reckless policy. This is going to hurt people. And in reality, the actual issue here isn't fraudulent payments to the tune of $240 million per year that happened in the state of Maryland. It's that the Trump administration isn't somebody who cares hard enough about the poor.
What's cruel and what's reckless is what the state is doing with taxpayer dollars.
Weighing in, taxpayer advocate David Williams arguing the governor's stance ignores a bigger issue, Maryland's own handling of the billion-dollar program.
The federal government should absolutely be asking for this information because, first of all, it's a lot of money. And secondly, this is the fault of the state.
The USDA saying the data is needed to weed out ongoing waste and spot fraud. Come 2027, new financial penalties will also be put in place for states with high payment error rates, meaning cases where SNAP benefits were over or underpaid due to administrative mistakes. Given Maryland's 14% error rate, one of the highest in the country, the state stands to lose $240 million in federal funding.
So one of the things that you realize with the second Trump administration, despite the flaws, which, by the way, they definitely are there, is that every day they basically come to us in the news media and tell us that something is being restricted or something is being demanded that you would just assume during the construction of these programs was being provided and or restricted this whole time. And a perfect example of this is the fact that the federal government apparently does not have access at all whatsoever to who the state is doling out this food stamp money to. Despite the fact that this money comes from the federal government, it is being assigned for the purposes of food stamps, and obviously oversight should come attached with that money, but apparently that's just not a thing. Apparently we have not been monitoring this whole time for decades and decades who has been receiving these food stamps, what happens when there's overpayments or underpayments. None of that has been in the purview of the federal government, which is just an asinine idea. It's ridiculous and absurd. And by the way, if you're wondering about that $240 million in penalties, that is in addition to the cost of the overpayments that they're giving out, which if you're at $1 billion for the food stamp program, means that $140 million bare minimum are being misspent or misallocated or incorrectly allocated by the state of Maryland each and every year. This is a disaster in every possible way and obviously is going to lead to consequences. And by the way, underpayments are counted in the administrative error rate, so that means consequences for the most vulnerable, yet Wes Moore is fighting against it. However, this was like the initial story. Like I said, it was the setup, it was the prelude. But what actually ended up happening after this was that you had a whistleblower come out, go to Fox 45.
Multiple whistleblowers told Spotlight on Maryland that two senior state officials allegedly hatched a plan to maintain a high error rate on food stamp payments by not correcting the errors, hoping to delay $240 million in federal penalties. Former employees, including a senior official at the Department of Human Services, have accused two of their superiors at DHS of the plan to buy enough time for the penalties to potentially be canceled after President Donald Trump left office.
And explained that the higher-ups were actually trying to figure out a way to keep the same error rate, that 14%, in the program while not losing any money from the federal government. So essentially trying to cook the books in such a way that they have that error rate, but also in addition to that, they don't lose any funding as a consequence of said error rate.
The former senior official told Spotlight on Maryland they informed DHS they were going to tell the Inspector General about the alleged corruption. About a month later, they say they were placed on administrative leave and terminated, they believe, as an act of retaliation.
Now look, these whistleblower allegations or allegations, as the super mayor would call them,
judging off of hearsay false allegations and not facts.
As of right now, are just allegations. And even though they 100% ring true, even though it seems like it would make perfect sense that they're trying to stall out the second Trump administration in order to get beyond the restrictions that are being imposed by said administration, the fact is we have to wait for evidence of this. And it's a good thing that we have a potential presidential candidate, Governor Wes Moore, managing the whole situation, because Wes Moore ended up promising that they would do an investigation into these multiple whistleblowers, identifying two specific high-up state officials in the Department of Human Services for basically going with this particular scheme. So obviously, if you have Governor Wes Moore promising transparency, you are absolutely going to get that transparency. Again, let us hear from the governor himself, Mr. Wes Moore.
With the issue of SNAP funding and the whistleblower allegations that top officials within DHS were knowingly trying to keep these errors in place and potentially putting that on the backs of taxpayers, did you know that was happening?
Well, no, and also I want to be clear that that's not the case.
So their whistleblower allegations are false.
No, what we have actually uncovered the fact that the allegations that were being made, those things were not happening.
The governor says an investigation has been done and the public will see the findings.
So here you have the governor saying, no, that's not happening. That's not a real thing. We've actually done an investigation. We've looked into this thing already. That was recently reported by Fox 45. And by the way, the employees who did the whistleblowing were put on administrative leave, and we found that there was no wrongdoing. In fact, we even probably had the people who allegedly did this thing or were accused of doing this thing investigate themselves, and they found out that they're actually the most kind-hearted and wonderful people. But that being said, while I'm joking about that, in reality, we did get a promise from Governor Wes Moore that the public would be able to see the results of this investigation. I mean, they did it so fast. They were able to discover that this thing that two separate employees identified was happening from two separate higher-ups in the state of Maryland in the Department of Human Services was absolutely false, ridiculous, and absurd. So obviously, we all are waiting with bated breath in order to see the results of this investigation. Now, of course, we get other statements from other officials in Maryland saying that it's not true. It's absurd, by the way, just so you guys know.
The Department of Human Services spokesperson Ben Schneider adding Friday, quote, the notion that DHS employees were directed to do anything other than continue efforts to drive down the SNAP payment error rate is patently false.
Now, this is also interesting because despite the fact that Governor Wes Moore says that they already conducted an investigation and discovered that they absolutely did nothing wrong, their denial of the sequence of events is not actually accurate to the allegations to which they were accused. Remember, they were saying that these two actual people in the Department of Human Services were trying to keep the rate of errors high, hide that rate, and stall out President Trump's second term. But the way that they kind of denied this is by saying that we concluded that people were not directed to keep the error rate high, which again was not actually the allegation. And if that slipped by you, understand, I think it was done deceptively in order to do so. But let us jump forward in time a couple of weeks to where Wes Moore is asked about the results of the investigation that he said was already done and completely cleared the Department of Human Services that the public would be able to see. Again, just a couple of weeks ago.
Even when approached directly, the governor wouldn't answer the questions from Spotlight reporter Gary Collins.
Who conducted that investigation? When did it conclude? And when do you plan to fulfill your promise to release its findings?
Well, I think we've seen the results. The results
Where?
The results are that when I first became the governor, Maryland had the second highest SNAP error rate in the entire country. That since I've become the governor, we are now down 60%. 6-0, amongst the fastest drop in the entire country.
So this is fascinating right here because almost all of the reporting on this has been done by the same local Fox affiliate, Fox 45. Again, I love their Project Baltimore series, can't recommend them enough. And they were told directly, although it was a different interviewer, that Governor Wes Moore had an investigation conducted. They discovered that they did nothing wrong, and the results of said investigation would be made public. But then Wes Moore tells this guy that the investigation has already been made public, to which he responds, where? Like, what are you talking about? In a genuine human moment. You can actually hear it in his tone. Let me play that again for you guys right here.
Who conducted that investigation? When did it conclude? And when do you plan to fulfill your promise to release its findings?
Well, I think we've seen the results. The results.
Where?
And then Wes Moore follows it up by essentially saying that there was no investigation, that they've proven it wrong because they've lowered the error rate. Therefore, there's no way that anybody was trying to keep the error rate high or stall out the federal penalties until the end of Trump's first term.
So, Governor, investigation didn't take place then, is what you're saying.
I think the results show that any type of accusation that there was an artificially high manipulation is not accurate because it didn't happen.
Yeah, that sounds incredibly sketchy. That sounds incredibly suspicious. That sounds incredibly odd. But guess what? This is standard, normal operating procedure for the Democratic Party around the country, which is, of course, say that there's no crime going on, and then when you're pressed on it, say that you've already investigated it, there's no crime going on, and then, of course, loop back to there's no crime going on when people ask for the results of the investigation. Honestly, Wes Moore is kind of an amateur compared to Gavin Newsom, who does this all the time, or Tim Walz, who denied Somali fraud, but then said, no, we're totally investigating the Somali fraud. Look at all the people that are in jail, not mentioning the fact that almost all of those people were prosecuted at the federal level without any help from the state, and any tips that were received were not from the state government. They were from the Minneapolis local affiliate stations actually doing investigations. But yeah, this is what you have going on right now in the state of Maryland. We had an investigation. Again, I showed you the clip, and this phantom investigation appears to have dissipated because it turned out there were never any true allegations of crime in the first place. Now, why those whistleblowers are on administrative leave, maybe that's going to poof out of existence too. Who knows? Governor Wes Moore absolutely doesn't, because he's doing a stellar job. Look at the error rate and whatnot, and something, he did everything right, and there should be no questioning of him. Now, obviously, I find this to be ridiculous and absurd, but I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social medias, support me via support links in the description of this video. Catch me on Timcast Wednesday, February 4th at 8 p.m. Eastern. Till next time.